Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this session about the new Cold War, how the contest between the US and China will shape our century. I'm Roland Freudenstein, based in Brussels. I created the Brussels Freedom Hub, and I work for the Free Russia Foundation. But we're discussing US and China today. And right next to me here is Sir Robin Niblett. I'll say three things about you. He has been appointed Knight Commander to the Order of St. Michael and St. George, hence KCMG behind his name. That's not a consulting firm. He, secondly, and probably most importantly, has been the director of Chatham House, the Royal Institute for International Affairs, for 15 years, and since then been active in many different roles in consulting and policy analysis. And last but not least, he wrote a book, which by sheer coincidence has the same title as the title of this session, The New Cold War, how the contest between the US and China shapes our century. So I would like to structure this short 19-minute left talk into three chapters, broadly speaking, with a couple of sub-questions to each. And that's, first of all, I'd like to talk about what exactly makes this contest so intractable, and let's have some rational analysis on what is actually happening, especially in China itself. Second, you wrote your book, Sir Robin, in the summer of 2023, when there was quite a different government in the United States. So what has changed under Donald Trump, and how does that influence the further development of that contest? And third, last but by no means least, what does it all mean for Europe? How does Europe position itself in this contest? Right, so without further ado, let's start with what makes this contest so difficult.
Well, Roland, thank you very much. And it's an absolute pleasure to be at the Delphi Forum and to have some space to talk about this big topic, because obviously we're all focused on Donald Trump at the moment, but maybe not so much on the dynamics behind it and some of the structure. Look, there are three reasons I would argue in particular that the contest between the US and China is not just intractable, but because it's intractable, I think should be accurately described as a new Cold War. Cold Wars are not unique just to the Soviet US period of the latter half of the 20th century. Cold Wars, we could have a third one maybe in the future, who knows. But they tend to reflect one important element, which is definitely a feature of this contest, which is an established power, the United States, used to being the world's number one, is now facing in China a true, as Pete Hegseth, the US Defense Secretary called it, a true peer competitor, the first peer competitor they've had since the Soviet Union started to kind of drift off, probably in the 1970s. That peer competitor from a US standpoint seems threatening because as Europeans, we think of America as a transatlantic power, but America is more of a trans-Pacific power. Now, we know this as Brits because it took Japan attacking America in Pearl Harbor in 1941 to be able to draw America into the war in Europe. They were not going to get involved otherwise. And America as a Pacific power is not excited by the rise of China as a force in that region that's going to be able to contest it. If you're sitting in China, you look to the south, and what you see is a ring of islands that are containing your capacity to trade with the rest of the world, from Japan, South Korea, through Taiwan, the northern Philippines. It's understandable that China, as it rises as a global economic power, as it depends on international trade, that it's going to want to make sure that it can be as safe as possible. So you have a big increase in defense spending taking place in China, a navy that by numbers is close to twice the size of America's already, not by capability, obviously. But we have a real classic contest of two great powers competing to see who will be certainly top of the pile in the Indo-Pacific, but potentially globally as well. And maybe the most important area that's of worry to America today is technology. where if you look at some of the assessments done by various people, the Australia Strategic Policy Institute estimates that China now leads in 57 of 64 leading technologies. Obviously, America's still got the commanding heights and some very important ones. But if you are a leading technology power, that means you'll become a leading economic power and a leading military power. And this is a deep fear. We can go into it in more detail if you want. Second key point, I'll be quicker on them. I believe this is an ideological contest. It is top-down government, China, Communist Party, one-party state, versus, you might say, the chaos of bottom-up government, of democracy.
Wait, so Robin, in your book you said it was liberal democracy, checks and balances, individual rights versus a one-party state.
Absolutely.
To what extent does that still hold true?
Well, I think it holds true in the sense that Donald Trump is, in a way, a product of chaotic bottom-up government. Checks and balances are something that he doesn't like, I think, personally. He has a long history of not enjoying the rule of law in America and trying to contest it from his own business time. But I would say to many people who worry about the fact that America might become something akin to the authoritarian states that it is contesting, that Americans like guns. And a lot of the people who have guns is because they don't trust government. A lot of the people who support Donald Trump are the people with the guns. So I just think Donald Trump, in a way, is going to reveal aspects of the checks and balances of American power. The Supreme Court has already ruled against him in several cases. They're in a race as to whether the courts can exercise force, and you're also going to see the states implementing from power, and we've already seen the US Congress, in essence, pushing Donald Trump to blink on trade.
Yes, but there was one point where he didn't blink at all in removing something that China genuinely disliked in recent years, and that was democracy support across the globe. The complete cancellation of US aid, National Endowment for Democracy, Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, Voice of America. I mean, if the Beijing elite drank champagne, the champagne bottles would have been popping, probably Mao Dai bottles or something. But they were really happy about this.
Yeah.
So where's the contest here? I mean, two birds of a feather, isn't it?
Well, as we heard in the panel just now, for those of you who heard it, the contest continues at the military level, it continues at the technological level, and it now seems to be taking place, reverse engineering, I might say, on the trade level. I seem to remember Donald Trump not so long ago was saying that he thought he could do a deal with Xi Jinping and he wanted more Chinese investment in America. In fact, I did hear him say that. But now we have the reverse side, that he's exposed China as the market distorting power, which, by the way, it is. China wouldn't have got into the position it's in right now without industrial scale espionage and stealing of intellectual property, and without running, in essence, a state-run subsidized economy taking advantage of a global economy. So I can sympathize with a lot of the criticism on the Trump side about the trade policy. But on the issue of democracy support, Donald Trump does not represent the values for which liberal democracies were created in NATO. I mean, I think if I can get to your second question, which I think you're probably trying to get to, keeping an eye on the time.
Absolutely, we're already in it.
Exactly. The biggest change that we're seeing over the last 2 months, 3 months, has been a shift from a Biden administration that recognized it was in a new Cold War with China and was going to contest it with allies. Mm-hmm. Allies actually became stronger in the Biden administration, partly because of the connection between China and Russia following the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Trump has taken the complete opposite viewpoint. Alliances are things that restrict America's freedom from action, prevent his capacity to do, America first. But it doesn't change the fact that the bulk of people around Trump, and Trump on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, at least, see China as the #1 enemy.
So how is this game of chicken going to end that is unrolling before our very eyes at the moment, this escalation of tariffs between the US and China?
Look, anyone would be a fool to say they know how this is going to play out, given that Jameson Greer was, I think, giving testimony about Trump's trade policy when he learnt from one of the members of Congress that the policy had just changed, and I don't think he was aware of it, or certainly didn't seem to be aware of it. So I'm going to be very cautious how I say this, but I will lay out a clear answer to your question. Phase one is now going to be to try to do deals behind the 10% and 25% car and bottom line baseline tariff with the EU, Japan, and anyone else who can do a deal. And in the meantime, the two Cold War rivals are going to stand off from each other, call each other nasty names, and not get involved. But I would be surprised if within 6 months, probably, I'm not even going to say a year, we don't have negotiations between China and the US. We're not going to go back to status quo ante. There will be at least 10%, probably 20% tariffs, at least 20% tariffs. The quiet ones that were imposed at the beginning of the Trump administration at least will remain, and there'll probably be some targeted areas. The Trump administration has put 70 more companies on the entity list just last week. So I think what we have there is a possibility of a trade negotiation emerging after he's done the deal with the Europeans. What he can't say is that I caved to China. He needs to get a victory first and then negotiate with China.
Great. So the last 5 minutes go to Europe now. And I mean, we've come a long way from change through trade in the 2010s to the idea of compartmentalization, you know, China as a partner, a competitor, and a systemic rival, and that was taken very badly in Beijing. And then came de-risking, you know, not decoupling. That would be a tad too radical for Brussels. Although, you know, my thesis is that any serious de-risking will entail some decoupling. I mean, look at car markets, for example, and the way German car makers behave like junkies on cold turkey when they look at Chinese markets. And now we're at the phase of rebalancing. So, and I'm deliberately saying Europe, not just the European Union, you know, because we're together in this with you guys, Sir Robin. So how does Europe handle all this?
Well, as we did in Trump 1, in Trump 2, it's an accelerant to change that we should have done in any case. We've had some very good panels already describing the critical steps that need to be taken. I've just come from Warsaw to Athens, which was interesting, trying to readjust flights, obviously, from that part of the world. But there is real understanding across Europe that the biggest change from Biden to Trump is from facing a much more dangerous world, China and Russia together, from facing it together with America to, for at least 3 or 4 years, facing it more or less alone. That is a radical shift and is going to accelerate the kind of transition we need to do in any case in spending on defense, but importantly, from a European Union standpoint, investing in greater autonomous strength, more open energy market, more open savings and investment union, as the capital markets union now seems to be called. Some very important steps to make sure that on a technology front as well, Europe is going to be more resilient. But the point I want to make here, because I don't want to repeat what everyone else has been saying, I think we have to be very careful as Europeans to assume that the future of the transatlantic relationship is Trump 3.0, 4.0, 5.0. America has always been a tough taskmaster to Europe, but it was good enough as a deal before. We need to be stronger in the relationship, but ultimately I think we need to make ourselves stronger to be able to be better allies for a relationship with America in 4 to 6 years' time. Not think of ourselves as how do we survive without America for the long term, because contesting China, contesting Russia is going to require a team effort.
The reverse Kissinger, and that's the last thing I'm going to ask you. What about this thesis that Trump has this long-term plan of somehow driving a wedge between Moscow and Beijing, between this romance or marriage of convenience or frenemy, whatever you want to call it?
Look, and there are other people in the room here know the United States very well as well, but I'm going to give you my interpretation here. I'd say most of the people involved in policy analysis in America, Republican, Democrat, even most around Trump, not all, see China as the #1 threat for America for the long term. And those who saw Russia and China as a combined threat have had to park the Russia threat and double down on the China one, because ultimately Russia isn't at the top of the list, obviously, for Donald Trump. So what you've got at the moment is a heavy focus on China. And obviously, there are some around Trump who believe that if we could end the war in Ukraine, under whatever circumstances, it will give space for the United States to really focus on that strategic contest I was describing earlier with China. However, my analysis of Trump would be as follows. This is a guy who thinks in very simple ways, and the simple way would be follow. Why would we be so stupid as to be involved in a war in Ukraine at which Russia's involved, in other words, fighting and trying to push Russia back, if we're driving Russia and China together and pushing Russia into China's arms, when there's a huge amount of money to be made by American companies, and for America to be wealthier, and even people who back him to be wealthier, if we can end the war in Ukraine. So it's not a case of trying to split Russia from China. In the end, I think he's relatively indifferent, he personally, about alliances in the Indo-Pacific. He's indifferent about alliances in Europe. But what he is interested in doing is giving an opportunity for America to be a player inside Russia. And if you continue with this war, you end up pushing the two sides together. So it's not, how do I take on China more strongly? If he can do an economic deal with China, well, he'll do a deal with China. But he wants to be in Russia as well.
I'd love to continue this, because I would contest that. But I will close with a conciliatory quote of your book, actually, where you say that the possibility is that when this contest finally ends, more countries and peoples will have embraced the freedom enshrined in democratic systems of governance than do today.
So, because we will do it without America, not just because of America. So I stand by that, in fact, even more today.
Yes, thank you. Cheers.